reading Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift, and we are on Chapter 10, My New Friend. The family's little girl was named Glumdalclitch. She was just 9 years old, and she loved to play with dolls. I was put in her care, and she quickly became my best friend and my protector. Glumdalclitch was only 40 feet tall, which was small for her age. She was a very good-natured child. She gave me her doll's cradle for a bed, and she put it in the drawer of a large cabinet as protection against the rats. When I pointed to something, she told me its name. In that way, I soon learned her language. "You are Griddig," she said, calling me by the name she gave me. She rarely let me out of my sight. Soon the whole countryside knew about me. Neighbors dropped in every day to see me. "I can't believe such a tiny thing is real," one of them said. "Imagine," said another, "it can talk." "It does exactly what it's told," said another still. "An attraction like this could make me a lot of money," the farmer said one day. "I will take him to the market and put him on display." I was upset. I didn't like being treated like a curiosity, but I was helpless. The farmer built a box to carry me in. It had a door on one side and air holes for ventilation. Glumdalclitch patted it with a quilt from her doll's bed to protect me from bruises. On market day, my master put me in the box and slung it over his saddle. Glumdalclitch climbed on her horse, and we were off. "I'll protect you," she said. The ride was worse than sailing a ship in a storm. The horse took 40-foot strides, and I bounced around inside my box like a rag doll. By the time we arrived at the market, I was seasick. I peeked out the window of my box. A huge man with a bell was shouting to the crowd of giants, hear ye, announcing the arrival of the tiniest man in Brobdingnag." My master put me in the center of a huge table. I bowed graciously to the spectators who had gathered around. "He speaks," they said as I addressed them in their own language. Glumdalclitch made certain that nobody got close enough to touch me. I drew my sword and I pretended to fight with an imaginary foe. The audience shouted with glee. They happily paid for my performance. And by the end of the day, I was exhausted. My act was such a success, my master decided to take me on a tour of the entire kingdom. "I'll make a fortune," he said greedily. The next day, Glumdalclitch clutched my box safely on her lap, and we set out on horseback. "Don't worry, Griddig," she said softly. "I won't drop you." We traveled many miles, passing giant rivers, mammoth forests, and fields the size of countries. I was the center of attention everywhere that we stopped. I performed 10 times a day, dancing, sword fighting, and talking. By this time, I spoke their language very well. One day, I overheard the farmer talking to himself. "I had made a fortune with this little man," he said. "But the work is killing him. He's so thin and he's so weak, he will die soon." He scratched his chin. "I will sell him to the highest bidder." The queen heard of me and sent word to my master that she wanted to see me. "She will be the perfect buyer," the farmer said to Glumdalclitch. "We are going to the palace." "I am pleased to meet you, your highness," I said to the queen when we were introduced. I bowed graciously, and she put her finger out for me to kiss. "You must tell me about your travels," she said. The farmer interrupted. "He is for sale, you know, your majesty," he said. "Then I shall buy him," the queen exclaimed. She gave the farmer 1,000 pieces of gold bigger than carriage wheels. He eagerly accepted, and I became the property of the queen. Glumdalclitch was very sad. "Your majesty," I shouted, "I have a favor to ask." "What is it, little man?" he said. "I would like you to keep Glumdalclitch as my nurse," I replied. The queen glanced at Glumdalclitch, whose frown had turned into a smile, and then the queen looked at the farmer. "She has my permission to stay, your majesty," the farmer said. "Hooray!" I shouted. Glumdalclitch picked me up and held me next to her heart. It sounded like brass drums, but I didn't mind. I felt wonderful. When the farmer said goodbye, I felt even better. "I must show you to His Majesty the King," the queen said. She picked me up and swooped down a long hall, holding me high in the air. I felt like a bird. "He's nothing but a wind-up doll," the king said when he saw me. He grabbed me from the queen's hand and put me to his ear. "But he doesn't tick," he said. "That's because I'm a real man," I screamed into the king's ear. He jumped. "My word," he said, "it's true. He even speaks our language." The king put me on a table. "I must have him examined by my brightest scholars," he said. "Send them at once." 3 scholars arrived within minutes. Astounding, one of them said as he examined my head. Amazing, said the second as he studied my teeth. Incredible, said the third as he tickled my feet. When the scholars finished studying me, they consulted with one another in a corner. He's too small to be a dwarf, the first one said. Then what is he? Asked the second. The third scholar snapped his fingers together. I have it, he said. The queen's little man is a trick of nature. Wonderful, the other scholars shouted. That is the perfect scientific explanation. There's no explanation at all, I said. But the scholars didn't hear me among their smug shouts. At last the king was convinced I was real. He agreed to let me stay at his palace. And your nurse may stay here too, he said. She shall have a lovely apartment and a maid of her own, the queen added. But first, Grigdig needs a home too. The queen snapped her fingers. Send the royal cabinet maker, she said. Soon a man carrying wood and tools appeared. Excuse me just one moment. The queen ordered him to build a little house for me. It wasn't little at all. It was 16 feet long and 12 feet high, with windows and a hinged roof that could be opened like a box. It had a table, a chair, and a chest for my clothes and a bed. Glindleclitch could hold it on her lap as easily as I could hold a birdhouse on mine. There were metal staples on the back so it could be hooked onto a servant's belt. I could sit safely inside watching the world go by my windows. You must pad the walls, Glindleclitch told the cabinet maker. He gets bumped around terribly when we ride horseback. I would like to have a lock on the door to keep the rats out, I said. When the box was finished, it was a perfect house. The chest was filled with new clothes that the queen's tailors had made for me, and the table was laid with a lovely set of dishes. The queen grew very fond of me. My table was placed next to her plate so that we could dine together. She enjoyed watching me eat in miniature. On the other hand, one bite of food for the queen could feed a dozen English farmers. She crunched lark's wings the size of turkeys, bones and all, and as if they were grapes. A loaf of her bread was bigger than my house, and she drank from a cup the size of a barrel. The queen's dwarf was envious of the attention that she gave me. He was only 30 feet tall, and one day I said to him, You're really a giant, you know. He thought I was teasing him. I'll get you for making fun of my height, he said. He grabbed me by his legs and dumped me into a silver bowl filled with cream. Save me, I screamed. I swam for my life. Greldig, Glindleclitch cried. She raced across the room and she pulled me from the creamer just as I was going under for the third time. You will be punished for that, the queen said to the dwarf. That worried me. I did not need an angry dwarf looking for ways to get even, and it didn't take him long before he tried again. The dwarf knew that I hated flies. They were as big as blackbirds, and they flew everywhere. They swooped and they soared around my head when I ate, and if I wasn't careful, they landed on my forehead. One day, the dwarf got a handful of the biggest flies he could find, and he carried them into the house, and he put them inside and closed my roof. Their buzzing nearly deafened me. I drew my sword. Prepare to meet your fate, you foul flying creatures, I shouted. Truthfully, I was uncertain if I could save myself. I slashed the air with my keen blade as they attacked like a swarm of angry birds, and they fell one by one until the last one was dead at my feet. My hero, Glindleclitch cried when she opened the roof. Word of my bravery quickly spread throughout the palace. On another day, Glindleclitch put my box near an open window so I could enjoy the view. I was eating a sweet cake when a swarm of giant wasps swooped into my little room. I killed 4 with my sword, but the others escaped. The dead wasps were as large as partridges, and their stingers were 3 inches long. I plucked their stingers to save as trophies. My fame as a swordsman grew. And that is the end of chapter 10.